You know, sometimes in the show I feel like I'm a record on repeat. MP3 file on repeat. Youngins. Anyway, I've said this basic message before, but apparently I need to isolate it and say it once again. So here we go, again, talking about teamwork. Specifically, support roles. What spurred this on was a comment said in a live broadcast from the dev team at DC Universe Online. They were announcing a work in progress coming out in DLC 10. The concept of the show and the forum post is to get feedback from players about future projects and build, and in this case it was a feature called Weapon Mastery. Wait, side note. I am just jaded enough to believe that companies like this really don't listen to their players. They're going to do whatever they want to do. Watching this hour-long program was kind of like listening to a used car salesman. It was an hour-long dog and pony show selling me a product that I really didn't even want. But more important to this discussion, they both said something about 22 minutes in. A viewer asked how this new feature would impact healers, controllers, and tanks, and their response, in full.
Right. We've always imagined healers, trollers, tanks contributing to damage, and I think there's a state in the community right now where a lot of those are just meant to, you're the green bar guy, you're the blue bar guy, you're the guy that makes me not get hit. And while that's true, we want those roles to be there, we still want those players to feel active and participating.
Right.
And I think this goes a long way to making them more useful about not just feeding the DPS players.
Right, because you can still do your job and do weapon attacks.
Right.
Right. Obviously, if somebody's about to die, you will stop what you're doing to heal that person.
Right.
But that's not, you know,
especially
that's not
when doing your job. I mean,
Now remember, this is the senior creative director and the lead systems designer, both basically saying the same thing. Healers, tanks, and controllers are, in their description apparently, merely support roles that aren't active enough participants in group events. Now you can see this kind of mentality repeated throughout DCUO. At the end of a 4 or 8 player mission, a scorecard lists the damage output first, with other output scores being secondary. And before people say that I'm picking on DC, every MMO is like this. When I used to play World of Warcraft, DPS scores were pretty much the measurement of your worth as a human being. You got low DPS? You're a waste of flesh. Go die in a fire, noob. Hang on, let me head off your arguments right here, because, yeah, their comments could be taken in a completely different way. They could have been trying to convey the idea that everybody should contribute to DPS in order to make the fights shorter. They could have been saying that they want the healers and the tanks and so-called support roles to produce equal DPS and occasionally stop and maybe heal somebody once in a while. Or maybe they just want everybody to be Arnie Rambo. Actually, come on, I want to prove a point. I'm going to be paraphrasing an essay written in 1958 by Leonard Reed called I Pencil, but I'm going to kind of change the context just a little bit and offer you guys a challenge. Without relying on anybody else, on no specialists at all, I want you guys to make this. Spoiler alert, you can't. Well, let's just start with the bread, shall we? Basic ingredients. You need flour. Now, okay, you can probably find the seeds and grains out in the wild, grind them down with a homemade mill, and you can store that in your own homemade container. And then you need to grow your own yeast, but you do that by soaking fruit that you grew yourself on a fruit tree, and then put it in a container of water that you made by yourself. And hey, you might live within walking distance of a salt mine, so you can just grab a chunk out of there and just grind that down too. It's getting a little bit complex. So let's just bake some bread, shall we? Okay, first you got to start by mining for metals and smelting them yourself in a forge you built yourself with tools you handmade yourself, then forming the metal into something like a pan or a sheet of some kind, and then firing it up in an oven that you also created yourself by gathering materials from the environment or just building it from said materials, and find stuff that you can sustain fire with at the right temperature. And if you want some butter on that bread, oh wow, well first you need to maintain a herd of cows, you need to know how to milk them, make the milk safe to drink, know how to churn, you have to churn said milk in order to make butter. The point that I'm getting at here is that in every step along the way, from the bread to the butter to the serving surface, millions of people have been involved in making toast. Good toast. In the modern world, we simply could not get by without specialists. Having specialists allows you to do your job better, but at the cost of having to be reliant on other people. For example, fighter pilots, they only fly the plane. The maintenance crews keep them flying. Now, pilots can focus on being better pilots and keep bad guys at a distance, and maintenance crews can focus on keeping the planes in fighting form and not have to worry about enemies dropping bombs on their heads. I mean, hell, even America's Army goes out of its way to talk about support roles in the real world.
Not everyone in the Army is a trigger jockey. What do you think happens when you're out on the field and you run out of ammo? That's where I come in.
I think the problem here is the game developers and the players have this mentality to them. The term support role has this stigma to it. I think the insinuation here is that unless you're on the front line dealing massive amounts of damage, that you are useless to your team and you're going to be bored out of your mind. If you're bored in a support role, you're doing it wrong. Welcome to a random 8-player instance in DCUO. This is not the well-oiled team machine they're always bragging about. This is an in-the-trenches dirty slugfest as we try to learn how to work together. And even in these random groupings, we manage to do it. I prefer to play so-called support roles in these because, at least to me, it's a deeper challenge than just making more DPS. Now, I've said this before, and it bears repeating. If I'm playing a controller in DC, I'm not just the guy providing power bar boosts. I'm throwing stunts the bad guy gnawing on the healer. I'm locking down bad guys to keep them in one area. I'm throwing debuffs the main bad guy so he's easier to kill and hits for less damage. I'm trying to position myself not to get killed so the healer won't have to worry about me. And all the while, yeah, I'm supplying power too. I would hardly call what I'm doing as not being active nor participating. I'm working my skin-tight skivvies off in order to allow the DPS specialists to do what they do best. I'm trying not to be a hindrance to the healer so they can do what they do best. I'm trying not to make the bad guy mad at me so the tank can do what they do best. It's a delicate dance. I think the main problem is that the gaming community focuses on one stat and one stat alone. Damage. Why do you think everything else is called a support role? But what if you de-emphasized damage? What if everyone was a support role and you win or you lose as a team? Behold, the power of video time travel.
All right,
either everyone knows or nobody
good luck.
wants to admit.
Here we go.
Science LRS on main screen, please.
This is a game called Artemis. Now, the setup you're seeing here was made for a convention space, but it can be played in your living room. I should know, I've done it. It's a spaceship bridge simulator, and each player has their own station on the bridge and a role.
So I'm sitting here at the science console. This is where everybody does all the scanning. This is where you do all the long-range scanners and you're finding out where the weaknesses in other people's shields are. Next to me is engineering, and that's where they play with all the power. All of these stations are specialists, but all the specialists answer to the captain, and the captain doesn't actually get a monitor. He's got the main screen, but he doesn't actually have a computer in front of him. All of these stations have to work together towards a common goal, or you fail.
Let's work on this one first.
The game can get chaotic pretty quickly as players call out information to each other.
Sir, their front shields are at 0.
The good players listen to the chatter and just adjust quickly without being told what to do.
Turning the ship around.
Engineering can shift power to where it's needed, and Helm can steer to specific headings. Communications can contact space stations, prepare supplies, and make reloading faster. What makes this game so great is that each player has a role to play. A simple translation, everyone is a support role. You have to work together because it's impossible to micromanage all of the stations. You have to rely on your teammates to do their role, but it allows you to concentrate on doing your own role more effectively. Individual stats don't matter because you're working together. You live as a team, you die as a team.
Explosions?
Congratulations.
Artemis
You're all
crew,
dead.
you died valiantly.
I'm a fan of the game, I admit that. But important to this discussion, MMO's power really relies in the massive multiplayer aspect of it. You know, community and teamwork. So it kind of begs a better question here. If somebody doesn't feel like they're active or participating because they're not producing enough DPS, then the better question is, why is DPS more important than community and teamwork? Let's go back to DPS as the only important stat. Healers, tanks, and so on get the short end of the stick because the emphasis on damage output. And as important as that is, damage is just one number in the larger scheme of things, but since it's the easiest stat to keep track of, the emphasis is on damage output exclusively. This is what makes people feel like they're not active enough or participating enough when doing so-called support roles. When the main stat is damage, and you're not primarily a damage producer, the end score is going to reflect that and give a player a false sense of non-participation. However, games like Artemis show that when you remove that statistic, everyone feels like they've contributed equally. So, as much as this won't be popular, I'm actually in favor of removing the DPS as a gauge. Now, I know that people are going to scream about how it's the only way that you can see who's pulling their weight, but again, damage output is only one side of the story. If you want to see how good someone is, you need a larger picture. So how about a win-loss record on somebody's info screen? How about stats based on team heals or enemy stuns or team goals? And as much as I understand how difficult it would be to automate these kind of stats, in the end, I think it would be worth it.
Players also need to realize there's no such thing as a support role. All roles are in the game for a reason, and they're all vital to your success. If you don't believe me, try doing a dungeon run without a tank or a healer, see how far that you get. If anything, a DPS character is kind of in support of the healer and the tank because they're doing utility damage to make the thing go down faster. So seen in that light, DPS is a support role. Think about that the next time you play. Still good toast.
Front shield, they're trying to charge.
I killed well played, crew. Well played. So that was actually a respectable difficulty.
Well, we tried.
We tried.
Next time. It's always the next time.
Death before dishonor.